This has been a lot of fun for me. Here's my, well, in theory, here's my disclosure. I took money from Beyond Meat at one point to do a study called Swap Meat, which I'll get into. So here's my outline. I'm gonna go through this in 40-ish minutes and leave 15 for questions. And I'm really no stranger to trying to get media attention. So I hope you'll appreciate how hard we work on the acronyms in our studies. So we really try to make them sort of easy to remember and try to use the first letter of every word, not the 7th and the 14th letter of the word to make the word and skip the words. So one of these had 1,500 citations, one had 800 citations. More recently, Swap Meat was the Beyond Meat study. That is my favorite acronym of all. I hope you'll appreciate that. Fee-Fi-Fo with the Sonnenbergs doing microbiome and cell just a couple years ago. That's been cited 800 times already. And we did a keto med study recently. So, you know, trying to get it in the newspaper and try to disseminate. And I don't know how many of you attended one of these, but it's either 10 or 15 years ago when Stanford Communications held some faculty meetings and they said, you're going to have to get out there on social media. You're going to have to disseminate your results in new ways if you want to be out there and compete with your colleagues and just to get your message out there. Should I fix something? Yeah. Hang on, everybody. Okay. All right. Soybeans, chana masala, steel cut oats. Okay, it seems to work. So as much as these were fun, I was trying to listen to the comms people from Stanford about, you know, try to get out there, try to do social media. I'm pretty good at Twitter, although Twitter is going downhill now, obviously. I'm trying Blue Sky. My comms director is trying to get me to do Instagram. I'm not very good at it. I'm not very good at LinkedIn. But this changed my life. This is the most impact I've ever had in my entire life. And it was basically a mistake. And now that I see him in the room, I just want to point out Kevin Schulman's, it's his fault for having me in here. Thanks for coming today. He recommended this. So if this is any good, give him credit. And if it's bad, you give me most of the credit, but give Errol a little, because he had a better speaker than me and I'm the backup. And so you should have had another backup other than me, but okay, thanks, Kevin, for attending. This was wild. It's just been a roller coaster of a year. And I wanted to share to see what kind of feedback I had from any of you, what kind of similar experiences. Maybe I'll inspire some of you to stick your neck out a little more. Or as one of the colleagues in my division said, as I presented this at our division grand rounds, if this happened to them, they would run as far and as fast as they could, change their name and hide under a rock. I thought that's not the response I expected. So let me get something very clear. It was not my idea. The whole thing came from Luis Hoyos, who is a producer. At one time, he was a photographer for National Geographic, and then he decided to make a documentary called The Cove. If anybody remembers that, it's a decade old, actually won an Academy Award for documentaries. Had to do with dolphin slaughter in Japan, and they were feeding mercury-laden dolphins to the Japanese school kids, and did big expose, got an Academy Award. And then 3 years ago, did Game Changers on Netflix, which is a story about vegan athletes. Some of that was a little hokey, but it got a lot of viewings on Netflix. And he approached us, the development officer said, hey, there's a producer who wants to talk to you about doing a study and he has money. So who would turn that down if somebody said they had money to do a study? So I have now divided my life into before Louis, before Netflix, and after Netflix. That's how I think of my career at this point. So I grew up in New Hampshire in the live free or die state, went to Colgate, as Ewan said. I skipped Berkeley. I didn't put that on here just in case I get in trouble. Came as a postdoc in '93. I do a lot with the American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association. I helped start The Menus Have Changed University Research Collaborative. That was Stanford and the Culinary Institute of America starting that. I've started a plant-based diet initiative on campus within our division, and I have the tremendous honor of pooping and feeding people on our microbiome studies with the Sonnenberg. So we've done probably 10 recent microbiome studies. And I'm 65. I could retire. I'd be pretty happy with that right there, right? But Louis had an idea, and he approached us with this idea. And so we had a whole lot of Zoom calls, and he said, I have money. And I said, well, that really helps with this study idea. Okay. And he said, what I want is I want identical twins. And I want one of the twins to go vegan and the other one to not. Other than that, Christopher, I don't know. I don't know how many days. I don't know what the outcomes are. I don't know how you get them the food. It's just my idea for a study. Do you think with those parameters and money, you can come up with something? So we did. And this is not my best science, I have to say, but it was $500,000. And we got 22 pairs of identical twins, so 44 participants. And we randomized them. And for the ones going vegan, if you can imagine, it's not easy going vegan quickly. That's a huge change to your diet. So in a couple of studies now, what we've done is taken advantage of some of these food delivery services. So if you contract with them, and actually, the last two have given us the food for the participants, just so they could sort of market that, oh, we were in a Stanford study. So they delivered the food, and that was for the first 4 weeks to the vegans and the omnivores for some little equipoise there, so that both folks were getting their food delivered. And then everybody had to cook their own food for the last 4 weeks. And then we got blood and poop and surveys, and we did this really fast because Louis gave me this very clear trajectory that he needed to release it on January 1st so that he could take advantage of New Year's resolutions for people changing their diets. This is all part of a big marketing thing. And he said, if I give you the money, and this is back in 2022 in the fall, you have to finish this, or can you finish this in 6 months in 2023? Because we told him there was a lot of analysis involved. And then he needed a year to work on all the footage. And they would pick 4 pairs of featured twins, and they wouldn't film the others, but they'd film the beginning, and they'd film the results presentation at the end. So we did it. We cranked this out in 6 months. That is the fastest turnaround we have ever done a study. And he helped us recruit the identical twins, which was pretty fun. But as many of you know, once you do this, after you've written it up and submitted the paper, then we all just sit there and wait for it to get rejected, resubmit, et cetera. And I kind of forgot about the film because it was months and months and months before this happened. And he was off, and we would hear he was doing other films, and he was flying somewhere else, and really didn't exactly know what was going to happen. He had come to Justin Sonnenberg's house, to my house. We did some stuff in here for the final presentation, et cetera. And on November 2023, we got accepted in JAMA Network Open. And we got a lot of views on JAMA Network Open. And I actually didn't think we were going to get in that level of journal. It was only 44 people. It was only 8 weeks. So I thought, you know, Stronger Study Design might have got somewhere else. But what really occurred to me at that point was, I think the identical twins was a hook for JAMA. I think it's like, oh my God, you controlled genetics. Like, who does that in nutrition? Recruitment's always super hard. Wow, we just notched this up in the rigor of science by a level. Wow, I'm super proud. We got in JAMA. That's great. I don't know how many of you do altmetric scores or think about that, but you know, an altmetric score of 20 is good if you ask Google. And so we're at 2,000 something for altmetric scores. And I'm getting feedback, and I'm getting pretty much love and a lot of good feedback in November and December. And I thought, oh yeah, wait, isn't the documentary coming out? And the producer held a screening for this in the Presidio 2 weeks into December. And I was already giving a talk in cardiology in LA that morning. And I said, you didn't even ask me for the day of the screening. And so I like missed the whole screening. I took an early plane back, and I saw the last 10 minutes of the screening. And I had to ask some of my friends, did we look stupid? Were we in it? Did we end up on the cutting room floor? I don't know. They said, no, we looked pretty good. We're featured. I said, okay, so now I have to wait to see what happens. So I did wait, and on January 1, it came out, and my email was just flooded with comments, mostly love, a little bit of criticism. In fact, enough criticism that somebody defended us on the internet, a guy named Plant Chompers. He's a techie guy who has a great following. He does a really good job with videos. And I even went on Simon Hill's The Proof to do a 2-hour defense of what we were doing. Okay, so I'm gonna get back to that, but there was a study. It was a relatively good study. It wasn't a great study, but let's just go there. Okay, so here are the fabulous co-authors that I got to work with. So take a gander and see if there's anybody you know. It was pretty straightforward. If you randomize identical twins to a vegan or an omnivore diet, both of them healthy. So this is important to me. I didn't make a crappy omnivore diet, I made a good omnivore diet. And I'll show you proof of that in just a minute. And you wait for 8 weeks and you check it. LDL cholesterol is the primary outcome, which is pretty lame because a vegan diet is higher in fiber and lower in saturated fat. So no one would be shocked that LDL went down, and it did. That was the primary outcome. We measured a lot of other stuff. The producer said, I have some more money, measure more things, measure everything you can so we can put it in this documentary. A little uncomfortable with that, but we did measure quite a few things, and you'll see how much fun it turned out to be. If anybody saw it, some of the love I got was, you did such an incredible job with representation. You had a South American pair of participants, and you had some black guys from the East Coast, and you had the 2 tall white guys, and you had the Asian women. And I said, well, no, it was really mostly white Palo Alto women, okay? Look, there was 4 who were featured, who were very diverse and representative. The study was not. This is what we get in our nutrition studies. Way more women than men, and we get what's in the Palo Alto area. So it was not very representative, but the movie made it look like it was. Okay, so again, you get 4 weeks of food delivered, 4 weeks on your own, multiple blood and poop samplings, lots of questionnaires. Trifecta is the group. Just out of curiosity, anybody ever order meals from Trifecta? We got one shaking head there, okay. There's plenty of companies out there, but we thought of that first 4 weeks as sort of an efficacy part of the trial. So adherence was higher. We didn't follow everybody to their homes and photograph them to see if they were eating it all, but we delivered the food and we asked them if they were eating it, and they said it was pretty good. And then 4 weeks on their own, so we could say, well, there's an effectiveness part of this too. So they actually have to buy it, prepare it, make it on their own. And I'm really proud of this little graph, so let me explain it just for a minute. In my world of nutrition, there's ways to rank how healthy an overall diet is. It's called the Healthy Eating Index, used in a lot of publications. And so we took sample meals from both diets to see what that Healthy Eating Index would be. And in the US, sadly enough, 100 is the best diet, and the average American diet is 60, usually a little below 60. So America has a lot of room for improvement. But interestingly, at baseline, our twins were right about there, at the average American, not very good diet with room for improvement. And so when we were feeding them the meals, quality went up quite a bit. When we took the meals away and they made it on their own, very proud of this, they're still both healthier than when they started, including the omnivorous group. Now, they're not equal. The lines aren't on top of each other, but I'm making this point to suggest that in one of my new favorite words, equipoise, we really put some effort into making the omnivore diet not a straw man to knock over, but a reasonably good, healthier than their usual diet. It makes me feel good making conclusions. Okay. Okay, so stunningly, the LDL cholesterol went down in the vegans because their fiber was higher and their saturated fat was lower. That was statistically significant. And when we looked at a battery of cardiometabolic outcomes, fasting insulin was also lower. And the vegans lost a little bit of weight. And I'm going to come back to that toward the end. So keep remembering that loss of a little bit of weight. This is just in 8 weeks, right? If anybody's into TMAO, I don't know how many of the cardiology folks are into trimethylamine oxide. Stan Hazen from Cleveland Clinic, who came up with this, really likes it. I know a lot of people who don't like it. There was a little twist. It wasn't initially significantly different, but for those of you who understand the bizarre world of TMAO, it seems to be a risk factor, but fish are loaded with it. And if you eat fish, which we think is good for cardiovascular health, it spikes up because you just ate the fish. So how can it be bad for you if it's in the, I don't know, but if you eliminated the 3 people who screwed up and ate fish right before their blood draw, it was statistically significant, but I'm willing to let that go, okay? We wrote this whole thing up in the paper and they took it. So we said, there's some outliers. So we had an RCT, we had identical twins, we had great retention. In fact, only 1 person dropped out, but because we were analyzing them as twins, their pair got kicked out too. So we had 21 out of 22 pairs finish everything. But it's a small sample size, a small duration, and it really wasn't very representative of the population. We concluded that this vegan diet led to improved cardiometabolic outcomes. Really not rocket science at this point, but we sure did get a lot of views. So the editor of JAMA Network Open sent us something, how many downloads we had of the abstract, and it was enormous. A few months after that came out, another group took our DNA data and did some biological clocks looking at epigenetic factors that might be related to aging. And the producer really wanted this. And I said, you're nuts. In 8 weeks, you're not going to make anybody younger. Well, it turned out 3 of the biological clocks lined up and suggested that the vegans, they have a number for it, but I'm not even going to quote it because I don't think it makes any sense. But they were statistically significantly younger than their pairs. And their telomeres were longer in just 8 weeks than the omnivores. Okay, now, so for those of you who, look to see how our results get disseminated, it was amazing how much the aging things, this sort of secondary outcome was there. So here's the altmetric score that I'm super proud of the main paper in JAMA Network Open. And the epigenetic paper scored higher. The secondary outcome, like put aging in the title and I don't know. Anyway, I was a little worried about this. But I know that Tim Asim's and Show did this in a journal club and they went through it. And I missed the last half of the journal club, but it was reasonable, right, Show? It wasn't bad. It was legit. I don't know how to interpret the genetics and the biological clocks, so I was a little worried that they were going to do this article in their journal club, and they did. So Lucia Ronica was the lead for us. She's a postdoc that worked with me previously. And then she brought this to a group called True Diagnostics, if I'm getting that right. And so the lead author there is one of the scientists from True Diagnostics. So stay tuned. I don't know how well this is going to work out, but the microbiome results are also very cool. They're not out yet because the Sonnenbergs are so thorough. They took these results, which, spoiler alert, were better for the vegans. And they brought it back to a mouse model. So they could see that it was better in the vegans, but they didn't have an explanation why it was better in the vegans. And so Matt Carter, who is just getting his PhD and is just leaving for a job, has now taken this to a mouse model to see if he can come up with a mechanistic explanation for why it would have been better. So hopefully look for this. It's almost ready to submit. So this is just a study that keeps giving. So we're going to be sending out another result. Maybe we'll get another high altmetric factor. Okay, but so now let's go back to the Netflix part. So I do think it was a reasonable study. I don't think it was our best work. It was innovative in some ways. And it was really a blast to work with this guy. But this whole Netflix thing was really quite a bit, it was really odd. So I was on vacation on January 1st. And on January 2nd or 3rd, my wife said, quick, come out. And I said, why? And they say, you're third on Netflix, like just in a couple of days. And so, why? What does that mean? Oh my gosh. Okay. So having fun. And this is why. So here's the thing. The identical twins were a hook, I think, for JAMA Network Open for notching this up a scientific rigor level. But they're adorable, right? Just for entertainment, identical twins are adorable and interesting. And so this is when they came here. Our results presentation actually was right here in this room. And so that was one of the shots we took at the time. And these are the featured pairs of 4 twins. And they got covered throughout doing a bunch of the tests that they were working on. And so we had Others in the document, the Sonnenbergs are in there quite often because they did a lot of work and the filming was on at their home, et cetera. But it went beyond that. Right? This is one part I got a hard time about. And I don't think I covered it later in the slides, so I'll just mention it now. We had a super buff vegan bodybuilder train them. And they all got DEX. No, they didn't all get DEXs. The producer wanted them all to get DEXs. And I said, dude, you are out of money. I can't do another test. And he said, well, I want to do the DEXs. I'm only going to do the featured twins. And it didn't work very well. The vegans lost weight and lost muscle mass. They also lost visceral fat. So it was kind of a wash. I thought the producer would leave it out because it wasn't clear that it was a benefit for the vegans. But I know he wanted to show how ripped Nimai Delgado was. And so he put it in for that. But I got so much grief for this because people saw this in the Netflix and they saw the DEXA results were not in the JAMA Network open paper. And they said, you manipulative son of a bitch, you left out results that didn't go your way. And nowhere in the Netflix did they say, oh, and by the way, for scientific integrity, we did not have data available for the full set, which is why Dr. Gardner did not put this in the paper. So I just got a ton of grief for not having that in there. Louis, I know why you didn't leave it out. You really wanted to show off Nimai. But he also interviewed 3-star Michelin chef who had gone vegan in his restaurant in New York. And he also showed Senator Booker. And I'm not sure if I'm allowed to show this, but he also showed Mayor Adams. And he also showed a chicken farmer who quit growing chickens and started raising mushrooms. And he had facts about concentrated animal feeding operations. He had a regenerative cattle rancher in it who went to eat at the vegan restaurant in New York. He had more facts about millions of metrics of tons for what's happening to the environment and all those lagoons of manure that are there. And he was really weaving the story in and out. And he would bring our participants back. Oh, they came back from their mid-study checkup. Oh, they came back for something else. Oh, now let me go interview somebody else. One of them was someone whose household was affected by the lagoons of manure, and her house was actually being sprayed by the feces that were coming out of this pig farm, and they were on her house and on her clothes and her laundry and on her kids' toys. And there were lawyers involved and activists involved. They even did a thing on the pathogens in chicken that you have in the kitchen if you put a black light on it and mark it up somehow. Marion Nestle is a well-known nutrition scientist, and they had the NRDC in there. He was weaving this whole story in and out of our study. So our study really was featured. It really was the thread that had held everything together. But there was a lot more to it, which I can't take any credit for. This is all Luis Sahoyos doing this. Okay, so this is just sort of mind-blowing for me that this is all going on, and I'm having a blast looking at this, but it took some time. It took a lot of time. I got a lot of grief. So pretty soon after it came out, one of my buddies said, dude, they are ripping you over the coal, raking you over the coals here. And I said, who is? This Australian actor. I said, why do I give a shit if the Australian actor is raking me over the coals? They said, well, you know, there's a health podcaster who runs it. I said, well, he's got 213 subscribers, 1,000 subscribers. How worried should I be? I watched this whole hour-long thing, and it was super hokey, but do you respond or do you not? How do you decide whether to respond or not? They were trash talking me. And so this was super fun. This guy saved me before I even had time to decide. So I was thinking, oh, what kind of response should we get? And Chris was a techie person. Oh, actually, he was the handler of Steve Jobs at one point. So he's well off and retired. And his passion is debunking nutrition myths like this. And so he made this hour-long thing. Oh, no, this is only 40 minutes. He did a great job. He pulled up all the people that had been trash talking me, had them all talking over each other, like saying, oh, Gardner, oh, this study sucks. Oh, it's horrible. And then he went through them one by one and dismissed them and addressed them for me. He showed me before he released it. I said, wow, that is really good. Thank you. And he even interviewed one of our postdocs. So Kate Ward got to be in that. And I thought this was a pretty nice quote. So sorry, egotistically, I'll share this. Maybe that should have been episode 5. And we did our own Instagram response, which I'm not very good at, but we, Meg Orsiari helped us put this together. 1,000 views. Okay, so we didn't address very many comments with 1,000 views, but we tried that. How many of you have heard of Peter Attia, who wrote Outlive? I actually worked with Peter on one of my best studies ever done here, the Diet Fit study. He helped me get $5 million for it. He used to help run a group called NUSI, the Nutrition Science Initiative. And he said, we failed Science 101. And he wrote this whole blog about it. I had to take him a little more seriously because he's quite popular. Categorical failure to isolate and test a specific independent variable with some other embellishments in there. So that seemed like it warranted addressing. And so this part's odd. This that's last century, Peter. So if you're going to compare a vegan diet to an omnivore diet, there isn't any possible way to isolate one single variable. So there were bigger increases in many things and there were bigger decreases in many things for the vegans versus the omnivores. And that was food groups. If you want to talk about nutrients, there were a whole bunch of nutrients that were higher and nutrients that were lower. That's just, you can't do it that way. That's such a bizarre comment. So I actually was the lead for an American Heart Association scientific statement where the whole point was to compare popular dietary patterns. This came out in 2023. We made this huge grid where at the top are all the dietary patterns. And on the left are pretty much the 10 basic recommendations American Heart has for a heart healthy diet. And our job was to see how well each pattern matched up with the AHA guidelines. And so we picked some patterns, we picked 10 and said, well, there's actually even more names than that, but there's probably 10 different patterns. And if you want to define a pattern, there are certain things it emphasizes, some that it includes, some that it limits, and some that it avoids. It's not like the Mediterranean diet is olive oil. You can't just drink olive oil and be Mediterranean. That would be a way to isolate a variable, right? It doesn't work that way. So, Peter, come on. So today, we don't focus on nutrients so much. We've gone from nutrients to foods to patterns. And the study was a vegan pattern versus an omnivore pattern. That didn't seem so hard to rebut. So here was another one from Peter, how insane to just say animal-based foods and plant-based foods. That's ridiculous. No one does that. Actually, the Harvard School of Public Health does this all the time now. They have a concept where they have a plant-based dietary index, a healthy plant-based dietary index, and an unhealthy one. And the unhealthy one, if you can imagine, is refined grain, added sugar, Oreos, sodas. Those are all plants. They're all unhealthy. And so blowing it up bigger for you, in a number of the studies that they've done with this, they can show benefit with a plant-based diet. But if you separate it out into the healthier and the unhealthier components, it makes a much bigger difference. If you get rid of the added sugar, the refined grain, the sodas, and the Oreos, the plant-based diets do even better. So Peter, it's not unique. It's actually done all the time. And Simon Hill had me on. If anybody follows him, I don't know how he pulls this off, but the interview was 2 hours long. And some of the interviews are longer than this. Do any of you watch podcasts that are longer than 2 hours? Rich Roll, I did one with him that was more than 2 hours. Oh my God. I don't understand how people watch these really long things. I thought everybody's attention span was quite short. And then here's another one that came up that was really informative for me. So this actually had, going back to the paper, if you went to the supplement, we had a little display of the calories that were involved in feeding all these people. And this is one of our, not main paper, but supplement tables. And a reviewer, I don't know who he was, he just wrote me, and he said, that study was manipulative. In that phase where they were feeding people the food, Gardner delivered less food to the vegans. That made them lose weight. Could probably explain all the results here with the weight loss. It had nothing to do with the vegan diet. So that was a pretty good comment. But I said, all right, I'm pretty good at tweetorials. So I made like a 10 tweet thing. And I was trying to be kind of said, hey, at Strathidridius, whoever you are, good job going to those supplemental materials. You missed a little bit here. So what happens is we asked Trifecta to make the same number of calories for both groups. And they delivered the same number of calories for both groups. We were not there forcing people to eat them with a gavage. So we said, you eat until you're full. And so we were reporting that they ate less. And there's probably at least a couple reasons. One, maybe with a limited selection of food, they just weren't hungry for more. Another, maybe they didn't like the food and they didn't eat as much. But I did not trick them into eating less. We gave them the same number of calories. And the next day, it wasn't actually this person. This is one of my greatest successes of the last year. Dr. Tro trolls me all the time. This is a physician who is quite heavy, and he lost a lot of weight. And he is a really vehement proponent of keto diets and low carb. And so every time I say anything that's not low carb, he trashes me on social media. And this time, he read my response to this. And apparently, he had trashed me, and I didn't know it. Because he said, I appreciate his explanation. I apologize for my quick judgment on it. On this specific matter, I was wrong. And it wasn't just written. It was a video apology on Twitter. Thank you very much. That made my day, right? I mean, there's a lot of trash on social media. And a video apology, I felt like it was a little bit of karma because months before, he had said something and I wrote back and I said, I agree with you. See, we agree on some things. We don't disagree on everything. But this was the best of all. So I didn't even receive this, or I didn't find this one. So someone forwarded it to me. Probably one of the best pieces of SciComm I've seen today. You know what makes it so good? Most people have no idea they're even watching science. And this was part of a multi-tweet post. And it turns out Kizzy is a Harvard professor who helped get out the Moderna vaccine. And my reading of it is her comment was based on her frustration getting that vaccine out faster than anybody thought they could get it out, and people weren't taking it. They thought they were getting injected with poisons and inserting other things. So please, more SciComm that's just plain entertainment. So I don't know, this is my experience. It has been pretty wild. It has led to, just so you know, to wrap up, a cancer survivor who's a San Francisco firefighter and leads the San Francisco Firefighters Cancer Foundation, went vegan to fight his cancer, saw the documentary, wrote me one of the 1,000 emails that I read egotistically. I should not have read them, but I read them all just because my head was getting big. And he said, a lot of people said this. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do the other thing? You should have done something else. And his started with, have you ever thought about doing this in firefighters for cancer? But the last line was the best. And we have money. So he said, what would it cost to do this in firefighters? And I said, well, even for a small study, minimum is $500,000, because that's what we have. He gave me $500,000. And then somebody else who was following me on Twitter was mad that I didn't do the DEXAs for the twin study. And he was talking to that plant choppers guy and not me on social media saying, why didn't Gardner do this? And, oh, Gardner didn't have enough money. I said, why didn't you write Gardner? So he wrote me. He said, so you're doing another study? And I said, yeah. And he said, you want $500,000. So I got $1 million to do firefighters. And then last month, I got invited to HA sessions to be part of a panel from the lab to the living room, and to be talking about taking some of the results that we get in our studies and sharing them in different ways, other than publishing in a journal and trying to get traditional coverage and our traditional scientific ways. So that's it. That's this bizarre story I've had. Really makes me think a lot about health communication and the scientific work. We do so much amazing work here, and some of it doesn't get out there. This was not intentional for me. This is total luck, total serendipity. But boy, it sure has me thinking. So with a shout out to all the folks who helped us do this, and it's just an incredible team. To Netflix or not, hell yes, I would do this again in a minute. In fact, a documentarian has volunteered so far, well, not volunteer, we're gonna give him some money, but we don't have as much, to film the firefighters. Because I mean, if twins are adorable, aren't firefighters? Can you imagine the firefighter diet calendar, right? I don't know, I'm thinking how to get those results out there. The Netflix part of all this was $6 million. I thought I got a lot of money with the 500, but the Netflix thing was way more than that. And all we have so far for the documentarian for firefighters is $25,000. So it won't be of the same caliber, but I am really fascinated in this whole idea and would love to take questions for as long as you want to hang out about social media, being exposed in this way, being critiqued in this way. How do you reply? How do you skip it? How do you not reply? How do you not take it personally? And so thanks for listening. That's what I had to share today.
We'll start with questions. We have a couple hundred online as well, but let's start with questions in-house first. Dr. Shulman.
Thanks for inviting me, Kevin.
This is great. I mean, I think, our challenge really is getting the message out there. It's going to be, unfortunately, even more important starting January 20th, because if we don't have a positive message out there, all these other messages are going to be all the public hears. So with that, like, who helped you with this? I mean, that's the amazing thing. How did you come up with this? And who's our resource at the department or at the school to help figure some of these pathways out?
I think all the Stanford comms people are amazing. Lisa Kim, who does those 90-second things. Margarita is really good that we work with. So we were fortunate enough to have some funds to hire a full-time comms person just to work with our nutrition group. I don't know how long we'll be able to afford her, but she actually worked for Michelle Obama at one point on the Let's Move program and some other things. And she's so good at picking out which types of things to do. So I didn't do Threads. I'm trying to do Blue Sky. She does a lot of them for me because I don't have time. And she'll send, does this look good for this? And I still haven't figured out Instagram. So she posts on Instagram for me. But sharing some of these resources can be really helpful. And this knowledge of, now she's trying to get me on LinkedIn. Which ones should you participate in? How should you use them? I really think there's some great talented people that could be shared around campus and built more into some of our programs that can help us disseminate in this new way. And it's pretty tiring, but it's pretty fun sometimes. When it works well, it's pretty intoxicating to see that your work is getting farther than you thought it would. So yeah, I'd love to continue working with others on that.
Dr. Mahaffey.
Hey, Christopher, great presentation. A lot of things to digest for the audience. So, early on in my career, I was getting beat up just like you were. And my good friend and colleague and mentor, Rob Califf, told me, hey, Ken, if you're not being criticized, you're probably not doing anything worthwhile.
Okay.
So I think the audience needs to hear that. Now, I know you can handle this, and in some ways it's a little bit of a sport handling this criticism and trying to decide what you want to tackle and what you don't. But give us some insights in what you did to help support your team, especially the younger faculty and the trainees that were part of this research that also come under the whole umbrella of the criticism and the social media exposure.
Yep. So, 2 of the postdocs were in our Instagram reel. 2 of the postdocs are first author of the main paper. And we worked with all of them. And, we have weekly lab meetings deciding what we're responding to and what we're not responding to. I mean, one of my quick hints is it's really easy to see how many followers someone has. So somebody has 10 followers and they're giving you crap, I'm not going to pay attention. But if Peter Attia does, we have to stop and we have to figure this out because a lot of people are looking at this right now. Or if you see the same criticism again and again and again, then we have to address it. So just in lab group meetings, it's just part of our culture now that we're getting this kind of exposure. We talk about it in weekly lab group meetings, and they're all getting pretty good at social media on their own. So exposure with less risk for them right now, because I take most of the risk, I think. Hopefully that's a strategy. Errol, somebody else?
Yeah, I'll jump online real quick. Our next week's presenter, Dr. Chen, asked, how do you decide whether to deal with online critics if seem to be done in bad faith, some fair mixed with the ad hominem type of comments? How do you decide what you engaged with and what you didn't?
And so part of this seriously is, do I have time? Oh my God, there's a grant next week. Screw it. I don't have any time. I'm not responding to these. And there's no real clear fallout from not dealing with it. I do remember one time we got a real serious criticism that seemed horrific. And I talked to a couple people and I was pretty stressed out. And they said, wait 3 days and see if anyone else is still repeating that. No one was repeating it in 3 days. Nobody had seen it. It hadn't gone viral. And I saved all that time not responding to it. So part of it is, do I have time? Do I have a good answer? Right? So if I had a lot of fun responding to that tutorial, to the thing about feeding them the different number of calories. Oh, wow, I have a really good, and I actually turned it into a lesson. I said, so just so you know, in nutrition studies, let me share this with everybody. And so my followers went up because I was explaining that, oh, you deliver the same amount of food, but you have to report what they're eating. Oh my God, they're not in a metabolic ward. You can't be assured that they're eating it all. So good for you for publishing what they reported eating. Wow, they're learning more sort of about the pros and cons of the science along the way. There isn't a hard, fast rule. You have to just go comment by comment and not get sucked into it. So really, my main rule is I can walk away anytime. There's a couple times I just walked away for a month or two. And I don't remember any repercussions from dropping it completely because it was draining.
Thank you for this incredible lecture. I have a question just from the perspective of how inspirational this is. I see a lot of younger people in the audience, and I'm pretty early in my career as well. I'm interested in knowing what advice you would give to people early in their career who are interested in science communication. What advice do you have about getting started, how to start letting the public know in terms of social media, et cetera, about your important work?
And so I got a great comment from a colleague that I don't always work well with, but he's out there and has a lot of followers, and he always sticks to the science. He said, don't trash talk them back. Don't get stuck in tit for tat. If you go with science and stick with evidence, nobody can get on your case for being petty about this thing. And so pretty much all my stuff is just science. And I try to be a little funny and a little entertaining. Like one time I was responding to the calorie thing, and I got a picture of a duck with a gavage going down his throat on Twitter, but they wouldn't allow it. They stripped it from Twitter. So that was like, wait, I put extra effort into finding the picture of the duck with the gavage so I could make the point. And apparently that looked like animal abuse. And so they stripped it from Twitter without, I looked really hard for that. So part of it is cutting yourself some slack and having fun with it, because it can be fun. I'm sure it's not fun for everyone, but it can be fun. So just dabble. The fun part for me was just dabbling and finding that level that I was willing to participate in and not getting too sucked in, because it can be a time suck.
Dr. Rogers here.
Hi, thanks so much for this wonderful talk. I'm an ICU doctor here at Stanford, and I think one of the hardest things for us was, working in COVID and seeing that there was such incredible scientific advance, both in terms of our own care in the ICU and vaccine development. And at the same time, the degree to which we recognize that the public doesn't really care what academic medicine says, and you had all these people not trusting it. So clearly the kind of work you're doing is really important. And my question for you is, on the other hand, it sounds kind of exhausting, and it just sounds like it took tremendous amounts of your time. So as academics, all of what the altmetrics, all that, other than citations, there's not much academic currency for what you're doing. And my question for you is, should that change? Clearly from a society perspective, I think more of us need to be more out there, but the way that we are promoted or, sort of build our things is much more about JAMA Network Open and less about the fact that 2 million people heard about veganism through your study. So curious what you think about how academic medicine should change.
Well, you certainly have to talk to leadership to what they think about promotions, et cetera. But to be honest, part of it for me is just the joy of my job. So it took more time, but it was more fun. And there was a grant that didn't go in and a paper that didn't go in that wasn't as good as it should have been, and it got rejected, and I had to resubmit it again. But it was more joyful, and I was having more fun with science and communicating and meeting people who were having fun talking about science. Like this part about making science fun, like Bill Nye the Science Guy type stuff. It's a little hard for everybody to channel Bill Nye, but that idea that, wow, the science, there's rules and regulations and we have to stick to it. And part of that's really dry. Part of it's really exciting. And so if you think like that critically, it's probably going to help you in lots of other things in life. So, hey, I'm a scientist. let's have some fun with science. So it's finding that balance of how much time you're willing to put in there when some other things do suffer. I love the idea of thinking about some of these metrics for promotion. And maybe it's not so much, you know, how many followers you have, but is there a way to measure the impact? Interestingly enough, I didn't know the metric that you had, the 700 million minutes or what, like, I don't know how to do that. I know that the producer of the film said Netflix wouldn't tell him how many people viewed it for some reason. And somebody else told him 50 million people watched it in January. So he uses that, but he doesn't use the whole year. So part of it is these metrics that comms people are really getting really effective at sharing with us to understand what they are. Okay, now this is going to sound really stupid, but if you go back and think of the all metric for the epigenetic biological clock and for the main paper, they were different colored circles. And the different colored circles was because the one about epigenetics was strictly traditional media. And the one in the main paper was a lot of social media. And so you can even tease apart how much traditional media versus social media, what countries is it in, how widely is it being disseminated. So that would be really interesting if that could be part of it. I would hate, to be honest, I would hate for someone who's not inclined to work that way to somehow be discredited for not doing that. What if they're just brilliant? They're doing, you know, Nobel Prize winning stuff and they're kind of isolated and that's why they're so productive. That would be horrible to ding them for that. But wouldn't it be great if you could get extra points for doing some of this? Yeah, don't know how to do that, but.
Hi, sorry, my name is Jenny. I'm in the Clinical Ethics Fellowship here at the Center for Biomedical Ethics.
Cool.
So yeah, it sounded like a lot of the challenges you encountered and hurdles along the way were like ethical in nature, like you alluded to. Well, and you explicitly talked about like, should I respond? Should I not respond? Should I engage? Should I not engage? And your colleague described some of that as like, well, this is like a sport, like I have to navigate. This is like a game. So I'm curious, like both in the past and looking forward, how did you navigate like these ethical conundrums? Like you mentioned comms, but like were there other resources or people you consulted? And like what in the future, looking forward, like what would be your recommendation to people as they're navigating these ethical quandaries?
Yeah, so wouldn't that be great if we went to bioethics on campus? Like if
I mean, you don't.
Yeah,
I don't know.
if you're looking for a plug, yeah. So for people who wouldn't know how to respond, or for me, for our next response that we're not clear on, there were definitely things where I went to this comms director and said, I think we should do this. And she said, no, you should do that. I said, well, I'm the PI, I'm the boss. We get to, oh no, I should listen to you because you're comms. A third opinion might be from a bioethical point of view, you should do this. So as more of us do this, it would be great to know what some of the resources are, to have some place that you could just ask a quick question and get some quick support back. Sounds great, yeah. But you'd have to have a critical mass of people looking into that to develop that resource. I'd be happy to contribute to developing that resource. Thanks.
To make cucumber tasty, we usually salt it,
Yeah.
sprinkle it with salt. Do you have studies on sodium content and how to make a vegan diet tasty or with low sodium?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it has to do with my new partners in research are chefs. I hug a chef all the time now, right? And so I actually once worked with Google chefs, and one of the ideas was not to lower sodium, but to come up with new flavor profiles. And in the process of coming up with new flavor profiles, they used less salt. And in the process of that, somebody pointed out to them, I don't know how many of you cook or have salt in an open container, but a standard cook thing is take a 3-finger thing of salt and throw it in, and throw it in, and throw it in. And they became much more aware of how often they were putting salt in. And they came up with some great herbal blends that they shared with one another. So Google has a lot of cafes. And so this was a study with a clinician that deals with hypertension. So she initiated this idea of working with the chefs on new flavor profiles that were lower in sodium. So that's one part of the answer. And the other part of the answer is a lot of kimchi and sauerkraut has salt in it. But if you eat that, you get fermented food and you get fiber, right? And so there's a little bit of balance of, oh, you know, I'm going to take I'm going to take it on and have some of this extra sodium because I'm having more fiber and more fermented food, good for my microbiome. So part of it is a balance. Yes, we need to lower sodium. But there's also, sorry, one more thing in this chef group that I work with. There's a company that's making hollow crystals of salt. And so from a mouthfeel perspective, when the crystal hits your tongue, you get the surface area sensation of that much salt, but it's hollow. So it's not delivering as much sodium to your meal. So there's a culinary perspective to this. There's a messaging perspective to this, but really, I've been having a lot of fun. Errol joked in the beginning about deliciousness. A term I use all the time now is unapologetic deliciousness, because after many years of working in nutrition studies and saying, hey, I know this cardboard will lower your cholesterol. This cardboard is high in fiber and low in saturated fat. And people look at me like I'm a moron. I'm not eating cardboard, but I can get a chef to make an amazing lentil dish that's got some African, Middle Eastern, whatever background that's delicious. And salt is delicious. It is. So there's ways to use it and not use too much and cut back. I don't know if you're familiar with this idea that Americans eat a whole crap ton of sodium. And Campbell's Soup once said, is it Campbell? Said, we are going to do the right thing and we're going to cut back on sodium. We're going to label our cans as low sodium. And their sales tanked and they put the sodium right back in it. Another group lowered it without saying it and got it to 50% of the level. And then fed it back to test consumers at the full level. And they said, what did you do to this? This is so salty. It's disgusting. So we actually acclimate to lower and lower sodium levels, but we'll only do that if the whole food industry does that at once. If only one company does it, they're screwed because people will stick with the other ones. But we can't, a lot of people in American Heart are working on that sodium level, working with the culinarians to lower it, and it's possible. So sorry, there were multiple ideas for you.
Dr. Salas here.
Thanks so much. This is fascinating. Obviously, I hope you can see how engaged the audience has been. I have a question going back to this idea of kind of incentivizing in some way science communication, and in particular on social media. Social media, I use it a lot. It's been very helpful to me in my career, and it's a double-edged sword.
Yes.
We see all the time people who get into big trouble for things they have posted on the internet and lose their jobs. I'm wondering what you think about what kind of support organizations should provide in terms of backing people up for things they may have said on social media. Because on the one side, I think if you're going to say, yes, we want our faculty, for example, to be on social media and to put their science out there, then I think we have to support them in assuming the risk that that comes with. But I'm curious what you think about that and what that support might look like.
Yeah, that's a great question to end on. And we do need to end in a minute to respect everybody's time. Early on in Twitter, I said something nasty about a colleague. And I didn't have very many followers, but my division chief approached me a year later and said, something has surfaced where you said something not very appropriate at all about someone on campus. This is not trivial. I said, okay. And then I listened to the other guy that just said, just do science, just do evidence-based science. This idea of having resources, whether it's bioethics, or whether it's someone who's just helped you understand social media. It needs to be fun and engaging, and sometimes a little saucy helps it to be engaging, but it doesn't have to be disrespectful or trash talking. So finding that balance for people who are interested. I mean, part of it is reading through social media yourself and saying, wow, that is offensive, that is bland and boring, that's got my attention. There is a middle ground there, and it takes some practice. So maybe collectively, we can start working on it together. Thanks for your time.
There's a comment on
Oh,
here. You consider getting Channing Tatum on board for your firefighter study.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Can I ask one quick one? There's a lot of questions online about this. How does this affect your diet, if you don't mind sharing?
So I've been a vegan for 40 years. So I was pretty much just studying what I do for the most part. My most recent changes, I have avocado toast with kimchi after working with the Sonnenbergs, because they got me into fermented food and the microbiome. And one last comment about the firefighters. It turns out that there is a Stanford graduate firefighter woman who is an identical twin, who we hope will be in the documentary, whose twin sister was one of the Baywatch lifeguards. Woo! Are we ready or are we ready? Let's do firefighters. Thank you.
I think we can end on that. Thank you so much.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.